Like it's okay to go through that stage and to embrace it fully and feel all of it and grow from it and learn from it. And then and inevitably what happens is when you do that, you suddenly find yourself able to love the people that are still around you more and at a deeper level.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Consult a qualified professional for your needs. Views expressed are those of the hosts and guests and not necessarily those of Meet Your Mental Helper Podcast LLC or its affiliates. We are not responsible for actions taken based on this content. Welcome to the Meet Your Mental Helper podcast. I'm Jim Weisbecker, the host. I'm also a licensed professional counselor in Arizona who loves to talk shop with colleagues. And when I do, I'm always amazed at how much knowledge they have. And I think to myself, they should have a podcast or they should be on a podcast. But they're not celebrities. They're counselors, therapists, psychologists, life coaches of all type who grind it out every day in our community to help us grow and to help us heal. Without further ado, let's meet today's mental helper. And welcome to Meet Your Mental Helper. Today we have Michael Shumway with us. He's a licensed associate counselor based in Tempe, Arizona, specializing in existential and Jungian therapy with a philosophical, I'm in trouble today, mythopoetic approach. Michael helps young adults and couples navigate major life transitions, existential anxiety, and relationship challenges, guiding them towards authentic and meaningful living. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
Michael, tell us a little bit about where you practice and what you do. And also, just a reminder, I'll have all of Michael's websites and social media links listed at the bottom of this and after the podcast. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so I am currently at a Revive Mental Health in Tempe. It's right off the 60 and rural northwest corner, right there, just behind the park. And I work with just an amazing group of people. Love my supervisor, love the owner, love everybody I work with, and it's been really great. Yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
So mental health is definitely a challenging work. I call it more of a vocation than work. But what
Yeah.
kind of what brought you to wanting to do this type of work?
Yeah, in my young 20s, I worked on a boys ranch called Aravaca Boys Ranch. It's since closed down. Unfortunately, Ron Searle, the owner, passed away of cancer a number of years ago, and after that, it just closed down. But I loved it. I worked there 2010 to 2013, something like that, and managed it. They did equine therapy. They hired me on because I knew how to essentially I knew how to put up barbed wire fence and dig ditches and train horses. I was good with horses, and
Okay.
so they had an equine therapy program. Most of the teens, a lot of them were like court mandated,
Hmm.
so sent because of violence, drug addictions, things like that.
Sure.
So and it was amazing, best job I ever had. In
Hmm.
the beginning, it was kind of like 3 on, 4 off, 4 on, 3 off type of a deal. You just lived on the ranch.
Oh, wow.
And I got to the point where I just had a little trailer in the back, and I was there for months at a time, just working 24/7. And I just loved the work. It was the first time that I found a job that I was like, yeah, I could do this for the rest of my life. I love this. I was doing online schooling, worked well,
Hmm.
had no social life. And that was the difficulty. Wasn't married, had no social life, wanted to date, wanted to do other things.
Hmm.
So ultimately, um, I went, I left and got a degree and entered the big kid world of corporate America, and I hated it. And I actually did website design development, did social media marketing, went into program managing for IT teams, that
Hmm.
whole route. And it was fine. I liked a lot of the people I worked with. I never had the feeling of loving my job.
Mm-hmm.
and every day was kind of the grind. And I got married and was I had talked to my wife about that, and one day she was just like, "Do it, just go back to school,
Mm-hmm.
get your counseling degree, and do it." And that was it. I leaped and went and did 18 credit courses and sprinted through schooling, and now here
Okay.
I am.
Well, that's really cool, and it's nice to have that kind of support too from a spouse. You know,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
rather
could not have done this without her. Yeah.
that's awesome. Um, so I noticed you mentioned there was a curiosity that led you to the intersecting worlds of theology, psychology, and storytelling. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so when I was we were talking about this before it started. When I was 8 years old, my older brother, who was like my hero growing up, right? I was his shadow. I think there's about 7 years between us, type of a deal. He was reading Lord of the Rings, and he said, I couldn't. He's like, you can't. You're too young to read this. So I read it, and I fell in love, and I read everything by Tolkien, and then after that, it was C.S. Lewis, and then it was just anything I could get my hands on. In the beginning, it was, fantasy, and then it went into sci-fi. And by the time I was 16, I'd read a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And
Okay.
I loved it. And I liked motorcycles. That was my, act- yeah, as a teenager, I guess, dirt biking and riding
Mm-hmm.
a motorcycle is cool. And Zen was cool, and so
Mm-hmm.
I ended up reading that book, and it wasn't at all what I thought. It's the story of I forgot, Pirsig is his name. He was a professor in Montana, and it's about him and his son driving from on motorcycle from Florida up to Montana, and it's like a travelogue, and it
Okay.
delves into all these philosophical and thoughts, and it just opened me up to philosophy, and so I dug into philosophy, and the more I dug into philosophy, the more I realized that there was such an overlap between philosophy and theology and psychology, because they all
Mm-hmm.
kind of deal with what is it to be human, I guess. And so my undergrad was in the classics, and I studied a lot of theology and philosophy and psychology, and then classics like Homer, Virgil,
Okay.
all of those things.
So, how do you bring that into your practice? I know that's a broad
Yeah,
question, but
yeah,
maybe pick. Let's just say I'm Bob and I have anxiety. that's and I'm
yeah.
coming to see Michael. How does that kind of how do those three things play into it? Where would you start?
Yeah, so one of the things in the beginning, I mean, I almost always use more of a CBT, DBT route to, just I listen to the person, I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Hey, Bob, like where's this anxiety come from? What's
Mm-hmm.
the constellation of your life? Where are all these different stars and how are they connecting, and all of these bright spots that are popping out to you. Um, and then I'll often go into something like existentialism, specifically more the Kierkegaardian existentialism. So Soren Kierkegaard, he was a Danish philosopher in the 1800s, and he had a number of thoughts. And one of the thoughts he had is that without anxiety, you'll do nothing, essentially. And this is picked up later by thinkers like Viktor Frankl and Rollo May.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the existentialist psychologists. Viktor Frankl, of course, it was a Jew in Nazi Germany and I believe it was in Auschwitz. He may have been in another camp, but
I think it
his
was.
mother, yeah, I think his mother, his father, his sister, and his wife all died in concentration camps, and he survived. And
Mm-hmm.
he was obsessed with, well, why? Why was that? And it was that he could make meaning. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the big things he found amongst the survivors was they were able to make meaning of the suffering. And so, okay, you have anxiety. What I would probably dig into more is what is it that anxiety is pointing you towards? I mean, Rollo May often points out that anxiety isn't necessarily a bad thing. You may
Mm-hmm.
have like a more of an existential anxiety that's pointing you to something. It's not a neurotic anxiety. And
Mm-hmm.
I think part of the artistry or part of being a good counselor is learning when that's the case. There are certain situations in which the anxiety, it is a chemical imbalance. It is something that is much deeper. Um, it's not like this existential anxiety. And we use existential anxiety now as like a little bit
Mm-hmm.
different than the technical way, but it's not this existential anxiety in which your anxiety is trying to point you towards changing your life in some way. And so, Jung was said something like never underestimate someone's ability to avoid change with neuropathy. I think that's something like that quote. I'm
Mm-hmm.
butchering it, I'm sure, but anxiety is kind of one of those things. We avoid the pain of change, and we hate the anxiety. We don't like the way it feels. We want it to go away. We do everything we can to escape it, and it lingers. So I'd use more the Kierkegaardian approach, exploring the anxiety, exploring the good that it's doing, exploring what it's
Mm-hmm.
pointing someone towards, and then more on the classic side, I would bring in stories of like Iliad or the Odyssey or Percival and the Grail or whatever, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
telling. And it just kind of comes to me. They'll say something, and I'll be like, "Hey, this reminds me of this," and I'll tell this story, and then I'll allow the client to connect with the person. And then they start to connect the problems that the person went through in the story to some of
Mm-hmm.
their own problems. And then they'll suddenly start to connect the solution that they used with their own solution. So I could be like, yeah, in the Odyssey, you have Odysseus and he's shipwrecked on this island and there's a cyclops and the
Mm-hmm.
cyclops locks him in and he's eating his men and stuff and him and his men, they blind the cyclops and um,
Mm-hmm.
as they're setting sail and they're leaving, Odysseus says, hey, if anybody asks, it was Odysseus, sacker of cities, that took your
Mm-hmm.
eye, and I'll tell them the story and I'll pull it out a little bit more, give more details and
Sure.
stuff. And in the end, one of the ones that they said that I thought was interesting, someone said, I realized that I have given my identity to to the victories I have, and now I'm scared that without those victories, who am I?
Oh, wow.
And it's like, yeah,
Yeah,
dead
that's
on.
really
You
cool.
got it. Yeah.
I think we always think of anxiety or stress. I wish sometimes we would switch from stress to distress. Because stress
Mhm.
even by itself can be healthy and good. Um,
Yeah.
so I think
Yeah.
sometimes it would be good if we didn't just blanket everything as stress and called it distress. But anxiety is always. I think common things for anxiety is to look for triggers. And I don't think we often, at least I don't, we don't label them existential triggers, maybe. Existential
Yeah.
anxiety
Yeah.
has existential triggers. Um,
Yeah.
what do you find is common with that? Would that be like career changes or
Mhm.
somebody dies and they're thinking about their own mortality more, or what's an
Yeah.
existential anxiety usually cover?
Yeah. I find the ones sometimes especially with older clients or somebody who's dealing with death and grief, it will be more the mortality thing. But the most common ones is isolation and what do I do with the freedom that I have? Just paralyzed, like
Mm-hmm.
FOMO, fear of missing out. That is like if I do this, then I can't do this, and then I'm missing out on this. But if I do this, then I can't do this. And I
Okay.
don't know what to do, and I'm stuck, and I like, do I take this career path or this career path? Do I date this girl or this girl? Do I do this or this? And this is where I kind of go back to Soren Kierkegaard, one of in his one of his better works, either or. He says, "Marry and you will regret it. Don't marry and you will regret it. Either marry or don't marry. You will regret it." And what he
Mm-hmm.
means by this isn't that give up everything you do will end up being a regret. What he means by this is whatever you do, you have to give it meaning. Otherwise, you'll end up regretting it. And so, in situations like, do I take this career path or this career path? I say, do all the studies, figure out as much as you can, come in, and then eventually you have to take what is, again, Kierkegaard calls a leap of faith. You don't know the end. You just have to leap. And you make the leap of faith. And then the way to make sure that you're not having constant anxiety is you give your decision meaning. And
Mm-hmm.
what that looks like will be different for every situation. And the therapeutic office, we work on that.
That that reminds me of a book I'm reading by Dr. Ellen Langer. It's her 25th anniversary edition of mindfulness. Um, it's mindfulness, though is from a Western perspective, and she's
Mhm.
done a lot of research, but she has a statement where she says, if there, and I don't know if she's quoting somebody else, but she said if there's an absolute right or wrong to a question, that's when it becomes disturbing. In other words, if a
Mhm.
question has to have an absolute right answer or an absolute wrong answer, that's where we become disturbed. And that kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of what you're saying.
Yeah, I would add on to that, especially if there is the absurdity of the universe and we can't tell which is right or wrong. So which career path do I take? And if I insist there's a right or wrong, and there may, if we could play out each universe, there may be a right or wrong. But when
Mm-hmm.
I cry out to the universe, like, which of these two paths is it? And I do all my research, ultimately I'm left, I don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
that is like a harrowing reality for us.
Yeah, and somewhere between it's right or wrong is the experience I'm going to have, you know,
Yeah,
and it's going to be had, and you're going to gain from it, and hopefully, and
yeah, yeah.
understand what came of it, you know.
Yeah, so this is the existential approach in the sense it's saying, like, even if you pick, let's say there is a right or wrong, even if you pick the wrong, you can make it the right by giving the wrong choice meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a client come in who goes through a terrible marriage, ends up in divorce, and they're like, I made a terrible decision. This was the worst thing I could have done. All of these things. You go, yeah, 100%, I understand where you're coming from. Like, make sure that you're there, you're listening to the client. And then you start to introduce this idea of, yes, but in 5 years, when you meet someone new and that works out, you're going to bring in all of this knowledge that you have from your quote unquote wrong decision that
Mm-hmm.
is going to be a huge blessing for the
Right.
next one. And it will make it to where you look back at your first marriage and you say something like, wow, it was brutal and hard and difficult and scarring. I'm so glad I did it.
Mm-hmm.
And people are going to go, what?
Yeah.
And that's
I've
the kind of existential idea.
being somebody that's interested in sports, anytime you hear an interview with a great athlete, they will always say, I learned the most, not from championships, but from the matches or games or whatever that I lost. And I don't, I think you have to think about that, because a lot of people are always thinking, well, you got 5 rings on your finger, you've won 5 Super Bowls or whatever,
Yeah,
but they're
yeah,
going to know the times I didn't win is when I learned the most. And I always find that
yeah,
fascinating, and a good life
yeah,
lesson, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, that's great stuff. Unhappiness, you mentioned, is a necessary component of true happiness and meaning. If some Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, it's this idea that discomfort is growth. It's kind of going into some of the stuff that we were talking about earlier, but an aspect of happiness is unhappiness. If your life is complete, utter joy and bliss, then you have no idea what happiness is. Being able to learn and grow from discomfort, from unhappiness, allows you to savor and enjoy and know what to do with happiness, know the importance of happiness. There's a work by, oh goodness, I think Brooks is his last name. He
Arthur
teaches
Brooks.
at Arthur
Arthur Brooks.
Brooks. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. He teaches classes at Harvard on happiness, and one of the things he talks about is essentially the key is being able to learn how to weather the unhappiness. And one of the things he talks about is there's a part of your prefrontal cortex that deals with pain and unhappiness, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
problem solving thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets activated, and you learn how to problem solve, and then you're able to go forward. Well, you don't just problem solve for one event, you problem solve for a number of events. And so it's a new tool that you have in your in Batman's belt, if you will. And
Hmm.
so the unhappinesses that we have allow us to use those tools to make mundane things happy, or use those tools to fully take advantage of happiness, or use those tools to spread happiness into the lives of others.
Hmm.
And I think that's a fascinating aspect, is the need for adversity when it comes to growth and happiness.
Yeah. And can there be happiness in, when I say happiness, maybe that's the wrong word. Can there be,
Yeah.
here's what I'm thinking of, there's a lot of research now on, well, and especially from the growth mindset field, if you lean into friction, your body naturally compensates with dopamine. That's why you go to the gym, work out, you come out achy, but you also have this good feeling. Of course, there's a lot of other reasons for that, but the body will balance that dopamine back to um, making you feel good when you leaned into some friction or embrace the grind, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then of course dopamine's addictive. So there's a lot of, from kind of a neuroscience perspective, if you embrace difficult things, there that can become in a way addictive. What do you think about that? In a healthy way, in a
Yeah.
healthy way.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, even in my own life, growing up, I did martial arts. I did, you know,
Oh,
a
me
number
too.
of
Me
different
too.
ones.
Me too.
And
Yeah.
in my late 20s, I decided I was going through some rough times, some speed bumps, and I was like, I need to get back into something. So me and a buddy, we went and joined a Brazilian jiu-jitsu place.
Hmm.
And it was, I mean, I at this point in my life, it was probably the lowest point in my life, deep depression, things like that. And I would go into this place and I would roll around with big sweaty guys, and they would choke me in funny pajamas, and I would leave and I'd be like, that was the most amazing thing ever.
Hmm.
Like I spent an hour and a half fighting for my life, trying to survive. I have mat burn. I'm,
Yeah.
twisted ankle, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I want to do that again. And
Hmm.
and yeah, I think maybe the term happiness isn't what we're wanting. We're trying to find something like contentment or meaning or something like that.
Hmm.
Because even when life isn't necessarily happy, if I'm finding meaning in it, like if I'm being choked out in a rear naked choke by someone, I'm not happy, but the event is meaningful.
What? Yeah, and one of the things I think about doing something like that, and I just interviewed Chief Master Mike Cassabaum. He's a eighth degree black belt, former instructor of mine. He was on a
Okay.
podcast, but we were talking about that, and I said, when I would spar and have to deal with somebody trying to kick my head in or break my ribs, whatever it was, I those were the most serene and calming moments of my life. And I think because you're so mindful at that moment, you're not thinking about your job. You're not thinking about the email you got to read tomorrow.
Yep.
You're in the moment. And I always remember those were the most, as strange as that sounds, the most relaxing moments because you're just totally mindful.
Yeah.
you're dancing, you're breathing,
Yeah.
so I think the same thing with being choked out. You've really got to be mindful in that situation.
Yep.
You can't be in fight, flight, or freeze. Really, you have to be in the frontal
Yeah.
cortex of your brain.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, when inches are actually miles, then it's important to fight for every one of them. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, this kind of reminds me. There's a 4E cognitive scientist, John Vervaeke, out of Toronto, and he does some work on flow state. And he talks about and there's three things that I think I'm going to butcher, but the necessary things to enter into the flow state where you're truly present in the point is level of difficulty. It needs to be difficult enough that you're paying attention, but not so hard that you can't do it. Immediate consequences, and I'm already forgetting the third one. But in martial arts, you're going to find a lot of those things. Or he
Mm-hmm.
talks a lot about rock climbing. Rock climbing, you're going to find like if you miss a grab or if you let go, you
Yeah.
fall. That's an immediate consequence.
Mm-hmm.
You have varying levels of difficulty within rock climbing, from bouldering to like I don't even know the classifications, but like extreme. I have some friends that do it, and
Yeah.
my fat butt has been gravitally challenged, so there's no way I'm going to be rock climbing anytime soon.
No,
But
I get
they
dizzy
will
on my
talk about
roof.
it and they love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I don't want to go up too high. Even in
yeah,
a like a
yeah,
hotel with where you can look down to the atrium or whatever, I'm like, oh no, this is no good.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
more power to them for doing that. But that's an interesting point. You're right. When there's some consequence to it, um, which kind of comes back to good stress,
yeah.
where you're where you're total. You know, it's bringing every part of your body alive and focused.
Mhm.
So
And I would
that's
even say, and this might be a bit heretical, but good anxiety as well.
hmm
We don't often think about anxiety as a good anxiety, but I think anxiety is energy. I mean, this is Rollo May's thing. Is he often will say, gosh, pointing us towards essentially anxiety is energy, and it's pointing us towards something that matters. And so, if we pay attention to the thing that matters and we
hmm
use the energy into solving it, preparing for it, whatever, the anxiety goes away.
yeah, and that's
But
we're
his
kind of
his
back to
his take on anxiety is very different than ours.
well, and it's kind of back to there has to be an absolute right or wrong. So there has to be anxiety has to be labeled bad. Even depression doesn't have to be bad, right? I mean, even depression has its place. I mean, it, sometimes I'll tell clients if I could wave a magic wand and just make you feel nothing about something that was important to you, wouldn't that be weird? Wouldn't it be
Yep.
weird to like this thing you're upset about or depressed about was important? And if we just snapped a finger and you'd be a zombie or a robot. And then people,
Yeah.
I've never had a person yet say, yeah, I would rather be that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. There's no such thing as solutions, only trade-offs. That kind of an idea. Um, but yeah, and I want to be careful because I do think that there are situations, and I think this is a given that we both know, there are situations in which anxiety and depression are much more something dealing with like a chemical imbalance, or much more dealing with something at, at, something that isn't as simple. And it's like this
Right.
battle. And
That's a good point. Yeah, good point. Because, some anxiety and depression are triggers from trauma. So, or can be dominating your life. And we're not really talking about that per se. Those should be worked
yes,
on. Should get therapy from that from a professional. But there's I think we're talking about there are times when it's useful. When it's just like
yes,
for example, somebody will tell me I have to give a talk in front of everybody at work. I'm really anxious about it. I go, well, of course you are.
yeah,
Of
yeah,
course public speaking is one of the worst. So it's it's
yeah.
normal. It's normal. You're nothing's wrong with you. You're just doing something
Yeah.
99% of everybody doesn't want to do.
Yeah. Or even something like, my father passed away, as much of a tragedy as that is, and they're like, I'm really depressed about that. And it's like, that's okay. That's good. Like it shows that you
hmm
loved this person. Like how awful would it be if the people we love passed away and we went, well, whatever. Like,
Exactly. Then you're back to being that robot.
yeah. Like it's okay to go through that stage and to embrace it fully and feel all of it and grow from it and learn from it. And then and inevitably what happens is when you do that, you suddenly find yourself able to love the people that are still around you more and at a deeper level. So
hmm hmm And brings in all that existential stuff. We'll call it
Yeah,
existential stuff.
yeah, all that
there's
existential stuff.
there's nothing like death to make everyone think about their own mortality, right?
Yeah, yeah, I
So
agree.
so let um anything else we want to say about being uncomfortable or about embracing the struggle? Go ahead.
I think one of the things that I find interesting is when kind of going to the other love I have, which is stories and myths and these old fairy tales or old religious texts or whatever. The reading how other people struggled and seeing how they came to solutions. Often, even if it's like was talking about earlier, like no one just got done with sacking Troy and is failing about having to deal with Poseidon. That is not, I've never had a client be like, yeah, Poseidon's still blowing me off course. But the story of Odysseus still speaks to people. I mean, there's a
Mm-hmm.
book, Shay, I forgot his first name. He wrote two books. One was Achilles in Vietnam, and the other one was Odysseus in America. And it was about, he was a psychiatrist, I believe. And he wrote about telling these stories in a way that connected with Vietnam vets or with Iraq vets. And
Mm-hmm.
how it helped them their own reintegration into society, going from war back to being home, into seeing their own actions that they did while at war or at home. And so,
Mm-hmm.
on this idea of discomfort, finding the deep, deep stories that also have characters going through these discomforts is cathartic for us. And that's originally why the Greeks wrote these tragedies and comedies, was for us to have a catharsis or a
Yeah, and
relief or a release.
it helps people to get outside of themselves, right? You're looking at
Mhm.
rather than just feeling your stuff, and this is something I do not with stories, but just try to get them to take it from feeling it here and being able to kind of look at it. But
Yep.
with a story does that, and that's really cool. How if they have to think about a character in a roundabout way, it's kind of like an open share technique, right?
Yep. Yep.
What would you tell somebody
Yeah.
else? But now you're going, what did Odyssey,
Yeah. Yeah.
Odysseus, what did he do? It's a cool way of doing that. I like that because it gets you
Yeah.
out
And
of your own head and kind of looking at a different scenario and then going, oh yeah, I get how this applies to me.
yeah, and it really is tapping into the same kind of psychological network as using an open share technique, which I think is fascinating because one of the things, again, kind of going back to the work of John Vervaeke, he either did or was talking about, I can't quite remember, this research in which they had people describe the problems that they're going through. And these people would accurately describe the problem. And then essentially they're like, okay, so what's a good solution? And they would be like, I don't know. I don't, I'm struggling to find a good solution. And then they'd say, okay, we want you to put this in like as if you're talking to someone else and you're giving someone else advice on your issues. And just by changing that mindset, suddenly they were like, oh, the solution to your problems are blah, 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 blah. And it was their problems. But
Mm-hmm.
just changing it from first person to second or third person shifted the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a powerful technique. I have had some people occasionally go, I don't know.
Yeah.
They'll say, I don't know. I go, what would you tell somebody? I don't know. I just don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But there's other things going on there sometimes. But
Yeah. Yeah. I find making the abstract more concrete sometimes helps with that. So, like, if they're like, I don't know, it's like, well, tell me someone who you think would go through a problem like this. Oh, well, my friend James. And it's like, okay, well, tell me a little bit about James. Well, we've been friends this long, yada, yada, yada. And they tell me about James, and I'm like, okay. And then I make the story. James is going through, and then I repeat
mm-hmm.
their problem back to them. And that sometimes just having it be more concrete, taking it from the abstract and making it more concrete will snap them or using again kind of going the story route and telling the story and then being like how is this applying to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So
And I had a class a while back with the woman was, and my brain is blank right now. She was a mindfulness practitioner, and she used a simple technique, and I've used it with people, and you can try it with people, if they're, you know, but
Yeah.
it it's you say, if you did know, if you did know, what would you do? And I would say 5 out of 6 times people then answer. I go,
Wow.
let's pretend you did know. Just pretend you did know. What would you do? Oh well, blah, blah, blah.
That's
It's kind of cool.
that's
I'm gonna
fantastic.
try and use it on myself sometimes. Let's pretend I do know.
So I'm gonna throw this out there and see what you think of it. So there's the work of Ian McGilchrist. He is a neuroscientist as well as a psychiatrist who studies the hemispheric brain patterns and like what parts of the brain do what. He
Yeah.
wrote a really great book called Master and His Emissary, as well as a two-part novel, The Matter of Things. I think is what it's called. Both absolutely fantastic. And in it, he talks about largely the right hemisphere
Hmm.
is about understanding like the whole of something, and the left is about bringing it down into what it is we can do. And sometimes we become so left brain locked that we can't see the whole picture. We've, to use a 4E site, we've reciprocally narrowed our view that what the world is affording us, what the problem is affording us, is stuck. And opening it back up to, well, intuition and things like that. So it's like if
Hmm.
you did know, what you're kind of leaning into is like, what is your intuition? What is your gut? What is the right hemisphere kind of pointing at that you're completely ignoring, that you've reciprocally narrowed out of view and you no longer see. And
Interesting.
that's another one I really, really enjoy Ian McGilchrist's work, and I've found it really fascinating.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a lot to be explored in neuroscience, and a lot of
Yeah.
there's a lot. It's I think we're living in a time where there's a lot of neuroscience coming out that
Yeah.
is explaining a lot of things in a really interesting way, and can be useful for clinical applications for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. But I find it fascinating that so many clinicians have found this intuitively with things like, well, if you did know. And
Hmm.
so, like, I can give a big brain explanation, like, oh, this is what's going on in your brain during this
Hmm.
process. But I find it amazing that for, I don't know, dozens, if not hundreds of years, we've had different people who have little hacks like, well, if you did know. And
Yeah,
it's getting at the big brain stuff. And it's
yeah,
just fun sometimes to know the big brain stuff, to kind of give it labels and stuff and go, oh, that's what's going on. Oh, cool, cool, cool.
right, right. No, for
Yeah.
sure. I think that's really important, is to, especially in clinical work, is to be able to explain to people what's happening. What, like,
Yeah.
if I'm not just asking you to breathe because, I've had people tell me, you're my fifth therapist. I go, so have you ever done any breathing? Yeah. I said, why do you do it? Everybody told me I'm supposed to, and never
Yeah.
explained it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like,
Yeah.
well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it
Yeah.
so that you don't just resent me telling you to do it.
Yeah.
You actually know what's going on in your body now. And
And see, how fascinating is it that when you do enter into the psychoeducation side, suddenly you're allowing your clients and patients to understand the why, and the activity that they were doing before suddenly has meaning and is affecting their life in real ways. Like before,
Mhm.
all these clients who are entering into like, oh, we're going to do box breathing, 4 in, hold for two, 6 out, hold for two, four, or whatever the breathing technique is. And they just do
Right.
it and they do it and they do it. And they're like, yeah, I feel a little bit better, but it's not this big thing. And then you break it down and you explain it to them and you talk to them about what's going on and you explain all of the big brain stuff. And suddenly everything they're doing has meaning and has a greater effect. And I think that's really cool and interesting as well. I don't know why
Yeah.
that is.
Which transfers us back to growth mindset. If you put meaning
Mm.
on something, if you just do the simple act of telling yourself you got stronger, the brain, as complex as it is, also really simple. It goes, okay, okay, got that.
Yeah.
And you do
Yeah.
get stronger. And there's some really cool studies out on that. We're just visualizing something, and then they test you
Yeah.
later and find out, you know.
So here's one of my two of my favorite studies that I like to quote to a lot of my clients. One they did on house cleaning service or hotel room
Yeah,
cleaning service.
that's
They took
Dr.
all the
Ellen Langer and I think Ellie Crum did that
okay.
research.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, where
I
they
love that
told the
one.
one
Go ahead,
group.
tell us about it. I love that one.
So you correct me if I'm wrong on any of my details, but they told one group essentially like they hooked them up to like heart monitors and stuff like that as
Hmm.
they went about doing their day-to-day job of washing sheets, doing all the things. And they told one group like, "Oh, what you're doing actually is equivalent to like what a lot of, athletes do or
Yeah,
bodybuilders do, or like a
fluffing a
full
sheet.
gym session."
Fluffing a
Yeah,
sheet works these muscles. Doing the
yep, yep.
vacuum burns this many calories. Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
And
Yeah.
then the other one, they just were like, yeah, okay, yeah, we just wanted to see what your heart monitor. You didn't really tell them anything. And what they found was the group that they said, yeah, you're doing a lot of working out and this is really good for you, got healthier. They didn't change anything, but
Hmm.
just the intention of what they were doing, they got healthier. And so I found that one interesting, and I often pair that with the two lab rats on the wheel. So
Hmm.
they would take these two lab rats, and when one would run, they would force the other to run.
Oh, okay.
And so while one was running for pleasure because it wanted to run, the other one was forced to run. And the
Gotcha.
one that was forced to run gained none of the benefits of exercise
Yeah.
and gained all of the negative aspects. It got more obese, it was less healthy, it died much younger, all of these other things. They ran and ate the exact same amount. They lived in the exact same size enclosures. Like everything in their
Yeah.
life was the
Isn't that
same
amazing?
except choice.
Yeah. There was another study, and I'm not sure who did it. Think it was, I think Ellie Crum, I think did it, or somebody. I don't know where I heard it now. I gotta find it, but
Yeah.
they had people come in and do a little simple wrist exercise with some resistance. Like they rigged up a contraption to make them do this. Nothing major, and they
Yeah.
did that for 2 weeks, I think, or something like that. Then they had another group come in and just mentally do it. They mentally visualized themselves doing this, but they didn't actually do it. Then they tested both groups after 2 weeks. And the people that actually did it had a 47% increase in strength. The people who did not do it had a 13% increase in strength.
Wow.
So 13% just sitting there and visualizing it, which is
Yeah.
kind of it kind of goes back to that power, the power of the mind, the power
Yeah.
of intentionally recognizing, right? Just intentionally saying this has meaning.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's one of the things I often will do. I talk to my clients about carrying burdens. And this kind of goes into the how do I use like stories and mythopoetic things and things like that is I talk to them about three particular people, these myths of these people. And I use myths in a technical term. I don't mean it to be derogatory, like, oh, it didn't
Hmm.
happen or doesn't exist or anything like that. And it's
Sure.
the first one is Sisyphus. And Sisyphus is the one who's constantly pushing the boulder up the hill and then it rolls down to the bottom. And I'm like, so often Camus uses this idea as well, but it's like so often the tasks we do are Sisyphusian in the sense that like we're forced to do them. We don't get a choice. We're cursed to do them. And
Hmm.
then two,
Hey, Michael,
we
your camera just went out. Just FYI. Oh, there we go. Good. Maybe it's good. We want to see you.
okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So the first one is we're forced to do them, and the second one is it has no meaning. This
Okay.
fist pushes the boulder up to the top of the hill and it goes back down. And I'm like, what burdens are you carrying that are Sisyphusian? And what would happen if you changed some of the things? And so like the next step up from Sisyphus is Atlas. Atlas is cursed, and in the stories, he holds up the vaults of heaven. But
Hmm.
the thing that we always see is he carries the world on his shoulders, type of a deal.
Gotcha.
And I think it has more resonance in that meaning. And it's like
Hmm.
we carry the world on our shoulders. Atlas is forced to, but it's meaningful. Like if Atlas shrugs, earthquakes happen and people die.
Hmm.
So what tasks do we do that are forced upon us, but are meaningful? And can we take the tasks that are Sisyphusian and give them meaning? And thus we're Atlas. And it's a step up. It's better. It's not
Right.
great, but it's better. And then the last one I do is a little bit less heard of, and it's Saint Christopher. And Saint Christopher's tale is kind of an interesting one. In the East, he's a dog-headed man, and in Western uh, Catholicism and the West, he's a giant. But either way, he's a monster. He's this
Mm-hmm.
monstrous man who, beginning, works for a warlord, and basically is like, I want to be a servant of the person that's the scariest. Like, I never want to be against whatever's the most powerful and scariest. And then the warlord comes up against an emperor,
Mm-hmm.
and the warlord books it. So he's like, I'm going to go work for the emperor. And he goes to the emperor, and he's like, look, I'm good at violence, and I will be loyal to you, and you hire me, and I'll be your scary guy. And so he's like, you got a
Uh-huh.
job. And so he does the work for the emperor. And then eventually the emperor is scared of a woman that throws a curse in the name of the devil. And so he's like, well, I'm going to go serve the devil then, because the emperor's scared of the devil. And so he goes to the devil, and he's like, I'm good at violence, and I'm a scary person, and I'll work for you. Devil's like, you're hired.
Mm-hmm.
And he's working for the devil. And then one day he realizes that the devil balks at the shadow of a cross. And the
Mm-hmm.
devil runs away, and he's like, what the heck is going on with the shadow of this cross? And so the story goes, he goes up, and there's a pilgrim there, and there's this line of pilgrims, and they're crossing this river.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, whoa, who does this cross belong to? What's going on? And they go, well, the person who owns the cross and all of this, it's at the end of the line of pilgrims, and you can talk to him. And he's like, all right. And so at first, St. Christopher's just sitting there, and he's like, this has got to hurry up. We got to get these people. So he starts carrying people across the river, and he
Okay.
starts like moving, he puts a cart on his shoulder and walks it. He's a monster. He can do all this. He
Mm-hmm.
carries 5 oxes at once. He's doing all of this stuff, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're being so helpful. Thank you." He's like, "This isn't for you. This isn't for you. This isn't for you. This isn't for you. I'm
Mm-hmm.
choosing to do this because I want to get to the guy at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
line." And it goes on and on. And then this lady comes up, and she's carrying this child, and she's like, "Oh, can you carry my child across?" And he's like, "Of course, I'm carrying your child across." And so he grabs the child, and he's walking across, and the child weighs like 1,000 tons, and it's
Hmm.
drowning him, and he can barely keep the child above the water, and he's struggling, and the whole time he's like, I'm gonna die, and like, what was my life for, and all of these things, and he's transforming his life, and he's completely rethinking everything, and he finally makes it to the other side, and the whole time he's like, for some reason I just can't drop this child. I don't want this baby to. And at the beginning of the thing, he wouldn't have cared if the child would have drowned. By the end, he cares that if the child would drown or not, and his life is completely transformed. He gets to the other side. Of course, the woman's there, dry completely. He's like, how do you know?
Mm-hmm.
How did you get here? Type of a. And he hands the child over, and she carries it like it's nothing. And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
who are you? And who is this child? Of course, the lady is the Virgin Mary, and the child is the Christ child. And
Okay.
so the idea there is Saint Christopher uh, willingly took upon this burden. Right? There was a
Mm-hmm.
willingness, and there was a meaning in the burden. He helped people's lives, and because there was a willingness and a meaningful burden, it transformed him.
Yeah.
Atlas is never transformed. Sisyphus is never transformed. And so how
Yeah.
we approach our own burdens also will be whether or not they transform us.
That's a
I
beautiful
think that's kind of
story.
a fun one.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's a it's really cool. Yeah. And I was thinking
Yeah.
about pushing the boulder up the hill. You know, maybe his arms were spindly and by the end they were very muscular. but but
Maybe.
but did he recognize that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe his,
Like, can Sisyphus recognize his own growth and
yeah.
therefore, escape the trap of the
May-
gods?
Maybe he lost weight. He
Yeah.
strengthened his
Yeah.
quads. He's chiseled. So
Yeah. Yeah.
but you could look at it that way. I don't know if that's part of the story, but
Yeah, I think I no, the whole point of the story was it's a pointless task. It's,
right,
it's just a
right.
repetitive, difficult, pointless task. But I think that's great. I think, playing with stories like that and being like, can Sisyphus,
Hmm.
can Camus be right? Albert Camus said, imagine Sisyphus happy, and that was the whole thing. So yeah.
Gotcha. And Michael, what populations do you work with? I think you mentioned you do some couples. Did I see kids too, or teens, or
Sometimes teens, my priority, the majority, there we go. The majority of the people I
okay,
work with are adults or couples. I do
okay,
see some teens, usually 16 and up.
okay,
And amongst that, couples probably are about 25%. I would say about half of the population I work with is men between the ages of like 20 to all the way up to 60, but right now it's probably like 20 to 45, 50.
Okay.
Um,
And
so a lot of men's work.
for that age group in 2025, what do you see a lot
Mhm.
of, or what's a what are, because we all know men have it made. They've
Mhm.
they they
Yeah,
control everything. Everything's cool. And by the way, in our profession, we're definitely the minority. Um,
yeah,
I always
yeah. I was
there's an
looking
old
on.
yeah. Go ahead.
There's an old saying. Go ahead.
Well, there's people that say outside of the therapy doors, men have their men privileges, whatnot. But on the other side of the door,
Mm,
men therapists, and I'm not trying to go down a rabbit hole, are sometimes
yeah,
minimalized or I've had my own experiences being told some things by women,
yeah,
and I don't want to. Again, there's amazing women therapists and supervisors and whatnot, but I don't want to get off track. But what do you find is
yeah,
a struggle for that 20 to 45 today in this day and age? What are you seeing?
yeah. Yeah. So I mean, kind of to hit some high level points. I do think that our industry currently, I was on Psychology Today, and I just did they have like this little statistic, and it was basically like in Arizona, um, and nationwide even, it's about 85-ish% to 15% women counselors, therapists, psychologists,
Mm-hmm.
psychiatrists. So um, women to men. And so it's a heavily female dominated field, and it kind of goes over into the education side. I mean, it wasn't that a
Mm-hmm.
couple of years ago I was in education, and that was one of the things that popped out to me was the approaches that we use are often geared towards women. And to be fair, the majority of people that seek out counseling often are women. It's typically
Mm-hmm.
around 65 or 70% of clientele is women.
For
Um,
sure.
so it makes sense. Like, let's train people to be most effective with the people that they're going to see the most. I think that's a very pragmatic view and
Mm-hmm.
approach. Um, but I do find that the way that we approach things like depression or anxiety or trauma or whatever between men and women is very different. Depression is much higher amongst women, but it's much more fatal amongst men. I think it's like a 4 to 1, 3 or 4 to 1. So there's 3 women who struggle with depression, or 4 women who struggle with depression for every one man. But though on the side of suicide, it's 4 men or 5 men for every one woman. And part of that has to do with
Right.
lethality of means and stuff. But I read an article in the AMA that talked about the American Medical Association that talked about how we as counselors underdiagnosed depression amongst men because it doesn't show up in the way that we've been trained to look for depression. And it's because it's very female centric, the way that we
Mm-hmm.
look for depression. We want to see someone crying. We want to see someone who says, I am sad. We want to see some of these things. And men will come in and they're angry and they're
Mm-hmm.
agitated and they're all over the place
For
and
sure.
they're bouncing around.
Mm-hmm.
And we go, oh, well, it's ADHD, it's anxiety, it's anger issues, it's all of these things. And it's no, that's depression.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't always show up as tears. Sometimes it shows up as rage. And
Yeah.
we've been
Good point.
so conditioned to both look for and diagnose from, again, I think for so long, the field was so heavily dominated by men for men that we
Mm-hmm.
rightfully were like, okay, let's pull this. And I think right now we just have a little bit of an overcorrect, and there are a
There's
lot of really brilliant.
there was some recent data that for counselors, people going to school for counseling, 35 and under is now 97% female,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, and
social work in general is like 80, like you were saying, 85, 15. So it is kind of scary. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing because we do still need men in this field, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think there's unique approaches that. women can bring and that men can bring, and I think they're complementary. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
there's never one that's better than the other. It's everything is a complement to the other, and that needs to be kind of remembered and balanced. And one of the approach differences is, you know, we are so, and this comes from even deep in like Freud, the whole idea of talk therapy. Anna O. He had a client named Anna O, who was, or that was her designation. I don't know if that was her real name, but
Right.
Anna O basically came in and she's like, "Shut up, Freud. I just want to talk." And she just told him to be quiet and for her to
Mm-hmm.
talk, and he had to listen. And he said, "Okay, yeah, I'm gonna shut up and just listen." And he found that it worked. It was very helpful for her to just express her feelings and emotions and for him to listen. And I think that this was played with a lot throughout. And Carl Rogers really runs with this. And we have a very big emphasis for the past 30, 40 years in person centric, being non directive, all of these things. And when you start to parse out the data, it's extremely helpful to give some people, and it seems to have a sex divide, a space to talk and express their feelings and let them know, like, hey, there's no moral judgment. You're
Mm-hmm.
okay. You're safe. This is a place that you can talk. And but a lot of times, what men are coming in, they're like, I don't want to pay you $100, $200 to tell me that I'm safe. Like, I'll go talk to a stone. Like, like
Right.
I can paint a face on a rock and do this for free. Like, what
Mm-hmm.
do you mean? And so men are less likely to seek out counseling. And so one of the things that I do is when when men will enter, I'll often frame the entire experience as like you're going to be talking and I'm going to be listening and stuff, but like let's problem solve. Like let's
Mm-hmm.
and they go, yeah, yeah, let's problem solve. Like, okay, what can I do here? What can I do there? And again, I'm not being as directive. I'll be like, well, what do you think? Like,
Right.
uh,
Right.
I'm trying to pull the wisdom out of them. It's very Socrates. I'm the
Mm-hmm.
midwife of their wisdom in this sense,
Mm-hmm.
because they know more than I do about their life, and they're going to
Yeah.
bring up something that either they didn't tell me or I had no idea about.
Mm-hmm.
And
Definitely. Yeah.
but the approach is different.
Mm-hmm. No, men are definitely more tool oriented, obviously, but
Yeah,
it's kind of like, let's get this done.
yeah,
Like, how many sessions do you think this will take, or whatever?
yeah, yeah,
But I have had women
yeah.
tell me, I am so, you're my, you know, I'm therapist, and I'm so tired of just talking and having somebody nod. And tell
Yeah.
me, oh, poor you. And
Hmm.
so I always go, okay, here come the tools.
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
not, we're not going to do that unless you want to, but,
Yeah.
and I've had
And-
seen men who are like, no, I've been around men all my life. I want somebody that's nurturing. I want,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
This isn't a monolith. Like there's so much overlap between men and women. But the reason I was pointing this out is I think it's just kind of a slight corrective to that pendulum swing and just brings attention to something that I've noticed. And like when I ask someone will I'll say something, I'll go on a monologue and then I'll be like, okay, what's coming up for you? That's the question I usually like to ask. What's coming up for you? And
hmm
and so often women will be like, well, while you're talking, what I was feeling was yada yada yada. And men will be like, well, while you're talking, what I was thinking was yada yada yada. And so what I've often found myself doing is after a man will tell me like, this is what I was thinking, I go, cool, 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 cool. What were you feeling?
hmm
Or after a woman's like, hey, here are all the things I was feeling. I go, okay, that's great. What were you thinking? And
yeah.
I just kind of challenge them on either side to kind of, again, it's complementary. It's one
hmm
doesn't solve the other. It's
Right.
a complement.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, I think we could talk for hours, Michael. I think
Yeah.
we could go on and talk for
It's like we
hours,
do
but
this for a living or something.
yeah, like we like talking to people. So, this has been great, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Would
And
appreciate that. Yeah.
before we go today, anything you have coming up? This will be posted relatively soon. So any special events you're doing or participating in, or anything you want to talk about, if people want to get a hold of
Um,
you.
Yeah, so I mean, you're going to post all my socials. I have a
Hmm.
YouTube, Art of Discomfort. I'm launching my own website as well here in the next day or two. Um,
Great.
Upcoming, I have a men's group that's going to be using Odyssey, as well as the story of Percival and the Grail to explore what it means to grow up and the aspect of going from boyhood to manhood. And then it pulls a lot of Jungian alchemy type ideas.
Okay.
And so I have an 8-week men's group that's going
Is
to be very,
any particular ages for that, or?
right now, I'm thinking probably 20 to 30 is
Okay.
the primary.
Okay.
If I have enough interest, I may break it down to something like 20 to 25 and 25 to like 35 or something like
And
that,
will
20
this
to 7.
be in person, virtual, or hybrid, or?
Right now, we're going to do in person. So it's at that
Okay.
Tempe office.
Uh,
It'll be in the evenings.
yeah, and just for anyone listening, where Michael's located is really centrally located. So a lot,
Yes.
Chandler, Mesa, Phoenix, you're probably all within a 30-minute jaunt of that
Yeah.
location.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Right off rural in the 60. Yeah. So it's right down the street from ASU, right up the street from MCC. There's a lot of
hmm
schools nearby. So, yeah.
yeah, yeah, great.
So I'm
Well, again,
working on that.
appreciate your time today, Michael, and look forward to
Thank you.
talking to you again. And we'll post all the ways that you can get a hold of Michael. So, again, thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Meet Your Mental Helper. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. If you'd like to learn more about our guest, you can find them on our guest directory at meetyourmentalhelper.com. You can find their social media links to follow them and also ways to directly contact them. If you would like to be on the podcast, join our Meet Your Mental Helper network. And we have several memberships that support the work we do that allow unknown experts to be seen. Look forward to hearing from you soon and see you at our next podcast.